Let's go to some other issues. As I said, they want to legalise cannabis in Victoria. It's certainly a push too around the country, but Victoria, like with so many things, is ground zero. It's been something that the Greens have pushed hard for. In the Parliament, of course, we know the Greens now federally are decimated, but legalise cannabis, the party, well, it's got plenty of influence, and Victoria also is in a very poor debt position. So, one of the biggest backers, as we know from Climate 200, the millionaire share trader Rob Keldoulis, well, he bought a Tasmanian cannabis farm in 2022. He's also a high-profile backer of the legalised cannabis party. This is a preference harvester, in my view, in many of the teal races. All of this is a big concern. Then you add in the serious mental health worries that people have, particularly in relation to young people and the use of cannabis. Joining me now, Brain and Mind Centre psychiatrist at the University of Sydney, Professor Ian Hickie. Professor Hickie, you're an expert on mental health. I'll ask you about that in a moment, but I think from the outset, let's be clear, there is a difference, isn't there, between the decriminalisation of cannabis use or any drug and the legalisation of cannabis.
Absolutely, and it's very important you make that distinction. Lots of people want to see the criminal element removed and not have people chased around by the police around minor issues of drug use. And the legalisation and what follows that, which you've just highlighted, is the commercialisation. And then you get into the problems that are now running in Canada and the US of the commercialisation, which itself creates all sorts of other difficulties, often people seeking tax revenue, as you pointed out, but often there ends up being an illegal market in addition to the legal market. So you don't actually solve the problem you set out to solve. And most importantly, you expose a whole lot more people, particularly young people, to the adverse effects, particularly the mental health effects of excessive cannabis use.
Yeah, Professor Hickie, one of the arguments in favour of legalisation is that it will take the illegal trade off the streets. It will create, a regulation environment. It will create a legal trade, and there'll be a clip of the ticket for the taxpayers. But that's not the case or the experience overseas, is it?
No, in fact, I'd suggest if anyone's been to New York City recently, you'll see legal cannabis shops, and outside you'll see illegal cannabis being sold, and there's a significant criminal element along with the legal element. Just like we now see in the tobacco trade around Australia, there's the legal bit, and because of price and competition, there's the illegal bit. So the notion that legalisation will entirely remove the criminal element just basically isn't true. And the supply issue is really the issue here. As you pointed out, there are many people who've invested or want to invest in the commercialisation of cannabis because there will be a large market. But there will also be inevitably large negative health effects, particularly on mental health and particularly on young people. So the associations with psychosis, with amotivational states, as well as with accident and injury due to intoxication are pretty clear cut. And my colleagues in Canada and the US states that have done this in particular have seen exactly that: increased presentations to emergency rooms, increased rates of psychosis. And this is one of the things we can control. We don't have to make the problem worse.
I've been told a lot of this impacts our young people, particularly young men. And given how tough it's been for so many of them coming out of COVID, given our suicide rates in Australia, given the sort of the desocialisation, I think it's fair to say that the devices have brought some young people, not all young people, but some young people. If there was ever a time to do it, you'd almost say this is not the time.
I think that's a fair point. The worsening mental health in young people was recognised by most major parties just before the election. We're going to see new investments in mental health services for young people. The last thing we need at the moment is another element in society which potentially increases the rate, and not just the rate, but the rate of severe mental health problems, which are then enduring. And that seems pretty clear-cut also in the medical literature now. It's not just that there's one episode of problems, that this often precipitates an illness which then persists and is life-changing. So most people in the mental health area, and I think the health area in general, they favour decriminalisation, as you pointed out. They don't favour legalisation and widespread commercialisation, which has really been behind a lot of the push in Australia, a lot of the push behind medicinal cannabis and a lot of the issues that have gone on, where Australia's had a pretty liberal attitude to medicinal cannabis as well, is really driven by commercial interests. And, we've had great trouble with tobacco, alcohol, other substances. We don't need to add this to the mix.
You're a voice of reason, Professor Hickie, and an expert, obviously. Thank you for your time.